we've begun the time skip. This was a really strange spot, I think, from a standpoint of when you think about how early the series is. 107 chapters is three plus years, like 3 or 4 years or so, but it's it's surprising to know how much of a jump Mishima did, because I don't want too much of the spoilers for Fairy Tail and Rave Master, but there's there's time skips, but they're way more kind of like handful of months to year. There's nothing that's like jumps this much for the main cast. I'm not even talking about the 7 year time skip, because obviously that has different context to like this 3 year one. But the thing that makes it the weirdest is that it's not like with One Piece when they had the time skip and the cast was all spread apart. So it's like they've been away from each other for those 2 years. I don't know much of the spoilers, but there's the fact that there's not gonna have been any progression of relationships, or I would assume a lot of personal stuff in those time skips, because like the characters are way more they're way more like set in whatever environment they were in, and they were alone in comparison to like their actual team. But it was way more in a way of like increasing their power level and stuff, and getting ready for the battles and adventures that came after the time skip. Whereas you have that with Eden Zero, but the main cast is they weren't separated for those 3 years, and that's the part for me that's going to be the weirdest to really look at. Is like, logically 3 years, the characters should all be like much closer. There should be like I would assume new drama that's maybe even happened between them. Like there has to be a really weird, I think, follow-up vibe for the area we're at after this chapter, because of that big gap in time skip. I don't think there has to be anything crazy, but I do think there has to be at least some notes of events that happened in those kind of like 3 years. It can be anything, but regardless of which, there's a lot to uncover in this, and I do think that Shiki jumping up to Rasmus Galacta, one, it makes a lot of sense from a narrative standpoint. Obviously, what happened on with Shura and stuff and everything in that empire, and then connections to Ziggy and Elsie, it makes sense of why, from the standpoint of Shiki's reputation in the series, that he would be moved up to that. But also strength-wise, even before the time skip, he logically was en route for that, because the oceans were minions of the well, I guess specifically Nero and Shura, but minions of a Rat Sensei's Galactica, and we knew about stuff like the B squads and stuff, and we knew an escalation of their capabilities. But the oceans were like that one spot right below him. You really can kind of only see Shura as that in between mark between people like the oceans and Nero. But it's like, okay, well, Shiki is around that area for beating Shura, so he's in between that area of like where the oceans were at and where Nero was at. Where that just to me puts him a couple notches away from like Galactica. Like, not like, oh yeah, he's got to train for another day, but it's like it's within visual sight of him being able to achieve this this level of power. I'm not the biggest fan on the gap in the time skip, 3 years again, because it does so much. It's such a big time skip that it's just like I would have preferred like maybe like a year, and then maybe after another arc there's another time skip. I'm not against it, but again, I think there's just a lot of events that jumped in this, and there's obviously going to be a lot to find out once we start actually getting back into the swing of things. Like, really, we only found out this chapter kind of like a display of like the characters' designs. For the most part, they all look the same except Shiki and Rebecca. I mean, really, Rebecca and Shiki just look taller. They just look a little bit more matured. And it's really funny because I'd have to go back and look at Haru's age, because I think Haru was around like 15, 16, similar to Shiki when he was starting. Because we had that comment from Hermit that the logs were 15 years old, so Shiki was at the start of the series is either around 15 to 16 years old, whereas like Natsu at the start of the series had to be around 18, because of, he should be around the same age as Gray, and there's only been about 3 years in verse, so he's only in his early 20s. And when you kind of compare that to like Shiki just seems to be tall. Shiki's has to be around 19, like 18, 19 years old, but he looks tall. I would actually really like to know if there's like a comparison of like the heights at this point, because like Natsu got taller again. I don't want to too much, but he got taller after like the, I guess, first technical time skip for the main cast. But going into Alvarez, like he got a good couple inches taller over that year, and it's not nearly as noticeable, I think, with Shiki, but I think Shiki just seems to have been shorter, I think. And I can't really use the comparison of like looking at someone like Natsu and Haru in the crossover, because the crossover's a crossover. I don't think Mishima was going for like pinpoint accuracy on all them, because obviously like some like power levels as well get skewed in there. But I could see Shiki being shorter earlier on, because I feel like with Shiki, in difference to like Haru and Natsu, is Mishima was going for more of, not necessarily the same thing, but kind of like Goku, where it's like you had like kid Goku, and then you had young adult Goku, and then you had adult Goku. And we've seen like adult Haru and adult Natsu. Again, I say adult, but like fully aged and matured versions of both. And I feel like Shiki's just a taller character. Haru got weirdly tall after like in his bit of time skip, but it's like Shiki just seems to be like a tall individual, because if he's only around 18, 19 and this is how tall he is, he's like gray, I would assume. Like there's no way that Shiki isn't like 6 foot, 6'1" after this. I would assume. I mean, it might just be that because his face kind of thinned out a little bit and he looks a little matured, he might just not just be that much taller. I'm just going off of like what we're seeing in this chapter, but I mean, it could change after the course of a chapter 2. Maybe he'll stand next to somebody, he's only like an inch or so taller. It's just that his face I guess trimmed up a little bit. Either way, that's obviously not the important aspects of the chapter. We see like they're just kind of doing their thing. They're going after people in Ziggy's army. I guess they're calling themselves the Skeleton Army now. And you get like a cool display, a little bit of Shiki's gravity manipulation. He's just lifting stuff all around him. Pino's using her EMP. And I didn't get like understand why characters are changed over the time skip, but it's weird seeing Pino altered, because like Pino really just has like a little bit sharper eyes, and then has a different outfit. And we do see like what looks like either Gira going on with her little rabbit machine ears. I don't know if she's always done, like it's always done that whenever she uses her EMP. I'd have to go back and look. I might have just never noticed. But either way, we do see that in the chapter. So if it is new, then maybe something cool for Pino. But Mishima didn't do a ton, obviously, off of this. As I've mentioned, it's way more set in a chapter of settling into things after the time skip. Way more about kind of being like, okay, we're in the time skip. We're after these couple of years. Let's just take a moment to kind of breathe and see where characters kind of are after this point of moving around and trying to actually formulate like where they're all at now in terms of both strength wise, design wise, where their characters are at from a story standpoint. There's a good couple chunks that are missing, and I don't think anything again needs to crazy happen. Like I don't need suddenly Homora's pregnant or something like these. We don't need anything like that, but I would like there to be something of like, over the course of the time skip, Jin and Wise became best friends, and Wise has been using his ether gear to advance Jin, and then maybe you could have something otherwise like, maybe Shiki and Wise aren't getting along right now for whatever reason. Something in there that kind of just adds like a mystery of events, because like one thing that is existent now because of the time skip is a lot of, I would assume at least, a lot of the tiny side plots, and there aren't a lot of tiny side plots right now that I can at least remember for Eden Zero, but a lot of like the side stuff would either be wrapped up or kind of just prolonged, because it's been 3 years. There has to have been stuff that kind of went down, whereas like now I think Mishima needs to lay out new plot threads. He needs to put out new kind of like little side stuff for like the characters, where it's like, oh well, after the time skip this happened, maybe Shiki actually lost one of his arms during that year, and now he has a robotic arm, and Mishima can kind of like jump right over the initial showing of like him losing an arm at battle versus like, we saw it in a flashback. Maybe we see like him actually getting worked on. I can easily see Shiki having more mechanical parts at this point. But like I said, there wasn't a ton that happened in the chapter. You know, mostly just kind of displays of strength, getting us a little caught up on some of the, I guess, overall events. Rebecca getting skipped to like being a popular VTuber, I'm not a big fan of. Just based on the fact like that was like a personal thing for her and it kind of got skipped over. It's not like a real big thing, like it doesn't hurt the story, but it's like it's kind of the same as like when we saw her starting to get her ether gear, but we never saw like her actually start to kind of grasp the fundamentals. She kind of just had it and then she was using it. It's just one of those things where it's like similar to that, and like I would have liked to see Rebecca start to gain momentum and maybe get a moment where it's like she does something, gains a bunch of subscribers, and then we see like over the course of like maybe an arc that she's gaining popularity. Like maybe if we had like an arc that every couple chunks there's like a day or two, and maybe she's live streaming events as it's happening. It's like we get to see Rebecca gain a lot of momentum as it's going up. Maybe she could have done something like that, like she live streamed a lot of events in the war, and then maybe she just gained a lot of followers from like doing something like that. Maybe like almost did like a journalist style of thing or something. There's obviously a lot of questions in there that it could have been. The last thing obviously was Shiki being a Galactica member, and all I can really say about this is like his eye design looks really cool, like with the energy coming out of where his mechanical eye is. I think that to me makes up for no eye patch, because at least in his form he's gonna look even more badass. But after this point, like we don't really get a whole lot otherwise of like large scale setup. I was hoping to see like Justice having like a higher rank in the Interstellar Union army or something, or like there's some form of kind of like alteration in his position, because like with Jaguar dead, it's like, well, maybe he could have been the new leader. Maybe there's another leader. Justice still isn't in charge. Well, I guess they're technically not in charge, but you know, there obviously would be the most senior person. But outside of that, there should be at least one person to replace Jaguar within 3 years, I'd assume. So we should get at least one new member of the Interstellar. And then also on top of that, I would assume there's going to be one more new member of the Galactica, because Elsie, Saint Fire Nox, I'm trying to remember their names, Aknoella, and oh man, what's the last guy's name? Or was Titan, I think, or something like that. Whatever that guy is, those guys are obviously all four still, I would assume, there. And then Shiki is number 5, so 6. You know, it just makes sense if there's plus one more, maybe a new character. Maybe other than that though, comment below, thumbs up the video, friend, like button, subscribe button, and check out my other videos. From that, appreciate everyone's already subscribed, and I thank you all for listening.